Hello everyone and welcome to Azure Spring Clean 2023 event and welcome to this session on Zero to Hero securing infrastructure as a code with Azure Bicep. I would like to start with a big thank you message for organizers of the event and especially for Joe and Thomas and everyone who is involved in this event. All right, let's look at today's securing your infrastructure with Azure Bicep session now. In the spirit of Azure Spring Clean, we will explore how you can organize Azure Security Services using the infrastructure as a code approach with the Azure Bicep. We will look into how you could declaratively define and deploy your Azure security resources, including Azure policies, definitions, and initiatives to tackle some of the real-world problems that you may face. So get yourself ready for simple yet powerful demos that will turn you into a hero by managing those compliances. And don't worry if you are new to Azure Bicep, as we will have a super express introduction to this new infrastructure as a code language to get you up to speed with the fundamentals. And in addition to that, please check my post for the Azure Spring Clean as it has a reference session where I'm talking about fundamentals of Azure Bicep. Please use the comments for interactions and questions on this YouTube channel and drop a line in comments if you have any questions. So a little bit information about myself is here, but I'm not going to talk too much about myself. I will just mention that you see my social connections, social channels on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and as well as if you need more information, you can always check the link tree. But I would just mention that I'm proudly running the Cloud Marathoner blog post and as well as the community of users. So be part of this movement to learn every day and get better in what you are trying to achieve on technical. Uh, so what I was trying to say is that I hope that you can enjoy this session. So let's dive into that. But before diving into the session, I will just give brief info about the company where I'm working. This I'm working for a T-Rex Solutions, and this infographic is where I'm proudly presenting is the work that solution to our customers with our team of engineers. We have strong partnership with cloud solution providers, and our company does support development of local communities in the area. In addition, this infographic is about the size. We are a mid-sized company, and we are serving the government and federal civilian agencies, with USS and DHA being the largest customers. By the way, please check out open positions and feel free to reach out to me if you have any interest and you would like to apply to those positions. That said, let's switch the gears here and start our session. So what we will cover in this demo is in this session is we will start with brief introduction to Azure Bicep, then we'll go and look into how to declare resources as infrastructure as a code, how it looks like. Then we'll talk about organizing the cloud resources, and then how Azure Policy will enhance your governance of resources and workloads that you have in your environment. And finally, we'll look into a demo where you can actually apply and use the power of Azure Bicep fees to manage the governance using the Azure policies, definitions, and initiatives. Now, what is Azure Bicep? It's a domain-specific language, right? It's created for Azure to easily manage the resources. Second, it's a transparent abstraction over ARM template. It's a simple way to manage your Azure resources. And it always get transpiled into the standard ARM template JSON files. So that's pretty much it about Azure Bicep. But again, if you want to learn more and you want to get started with that, there is a link to video on my post on Azure Spring Clean please check that one. All right, I hope that would work for you. So you can pause this video, watch the other one, and then come back and continue from here. So declaring resources as infrastructure as a code. Here's a sample of infrastructure as a code of Azure Bicep declaration of a storage account on the left side of this screenshot. And then on the right side, we have a ARM template declaration. You would find similarities if you are coming from programming background. You would find a lot of similarities in terms of how it is easy to understand and how it is much more easier to manage some software programming concepts using the Azure Bicep, and it is much different with JSON declaration when you are using ARM template. So if you are a newcomer to infrastructure as a code and declaring your cloud resources, I would strongly recommend to look at infrastructure as a code tools. And for your Azure environment, you would definitely want to go and check the Azure Bicep. In this case, for this example, we have two storage accounts declared and parameterized, and as well as we have certain features of Azure Bicep in terms of checking the lengths of the prefix and other properties of the resources. So next, let's talk about organizing your cloud resources. No matter how small or big is your project, taking time to think through the approach of how to organize your digital asset is an important task, right? So in Microsoft Azure, you would need to consider a couple of points while trying to make this decision. Namely, you would need to consider the factor of resource governance. What are the resources that you are trying to govern and put some guardrails on? Then you would want to consider the scope. Do you want to start on a management group, or do you want to have a hierarchy of management groups in order to have this fine-tuned scope to manage the compliance based on the project or the compliance of the environment that you need to run. Next, you want to look into infrastructure as a code management options and which one is most familiar for your team. Whenever you are trying to implement something, you need to make sure that team is familiar with that and you go through some cycle of adoption where team members, developers, implementers, and as well as people on the management and approval side have good understanding in terms of why you need that and what are the benefits you are going to bring. So in terms of managing this infrastructure as a code using the Azure Bicep language and Azure environment, you have a couple choices, right? So you have these modules in Azure Bicep that you can use to modularize and reuse your resources. You also have this Azure Container Registry, a repository that you can create for your team and your organization and push commonly used modules and resources into there so that across the team and organization, you can use your specific organizational settings on those resources. And just to give you example, let's say if your organization has such a compliance saying that whenever there is a storage account or any storage related resource is provisioned on your Azure subscription, you need to make sure that it is provisioned with a lock to make sure that there is no accidental deletion uh, done on the environment so that your storage account and data that has actually gone, right? So that lock would prevent even the people with higher administrative privileges to be able to go and delete that, right? So another example where you can manage your resources and as well as deploy them from that resource is a template specs, right? So you can have this template specs, which is a resource in Azure where you can deploy your ARM templates. You can also deploy Bicep language code there, which is going to be transpiled into ARM JSON representation. And then once you have it there and you want to manage using the template specs, that will be another option that you can have. All right, that said, let's have a look into Azure policies for governance. So Azure policies basically what it does, it evaluates resources at a specific time during the resource lifecycle and policy assignment lifecycle, and for regular ongoing compliance evaluations. What it means that the following events or times will trigger an evaluation of the compliance. So first one is going to be when a resource has been created, deleted, or updated in the scope with a policy assignment, right? And as a scope, you can think about, for example, a management group scope, or it can be a root scope, or it can be actual subscription as a scope where you deploy your policies. Usually, subscription is a good place to start with, and then for organizational needs, if you have, for example, a certain program or project goes across multiple subscription that needs to be compliant and has set of compliance guardrails that you need to apply that across the subscriptions, then you want to make sure that your deployment scope is a management group. Next it's a policy or an initiative is newly assigned to a scope. So another way when you trigger this reevaluation of the compliance is when your policy or initiative itself is get reassigned or you change the scope. Another point where you get reevaluation is a policy or an initiative that's been assigned to a scope is updated, meaning that when there's an actual update happens on the definition or the scope of the policy. And keep in mind that as a standard policy, if you didn't make any change on the policy or on the resource, the standard way how this cycle of evaluation happens is it happens every 24 hours. And when we speak about Azure Policy, I want to make sure that you have a clear understanding and separation that from Azure, from the resource back, from role-based access control, from RBAC. So RBAC is not same as Azure Policy. So if access and actions need to be controlled, then you would use Azure role-based access control because you are trying to control access and actions. Can this, for example, person A go and spin up a virtual machine? That's all about access. And in contrary, if an actor, meaning that if a user or a process has an access to complete an action, but the result is a non-compliant resource because you are changing something, you are changing the state of resource to a non-compliant state, then Azure Policy still can block that action, making sure that non-compliant change to the resource is prevented because they are blocking, they are trying to make sure that resources and their configuration stay within the compliant configuration that you defined in your policies. Now, I'm going a little bit faster here, but now let's look at the demo where we can actually take these concepts and look into some concrete implementation, right? So that we can get some understanding and feel what it looks like to apply the compliance. And as an example in this demo, I'm going to use, I will start with a simple tagging governance policy, which will include multiple policy definitions, which I will wrap into an initiative, and that initiative, policy initiative, I call tag governance. But before diving into that and multiple sets of it, I want to go back to the Azure portal and just show you what are the samples and where you can get started using this built-in. You can take the built-in custom built-in policies in Azure portal, look at them, convert them into Bicep and use, customize and use for your project. So I'm going to navigate to Azure portal now. And here on your screen, you see the Azure portal where I'm actually in the policies already. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. Okay, here we go. So we are in the policies. So here, when you want to go and look into existing policies to get some ideas or learn from the built-in policies that Azure comes with, you can go into policies and click to the definitions. then it will spin up a little bit of time to bring all the list. So here you would need to select your subscription, definition type. Are you looking to some samples on initiatives or the policy itself? Then you can look into categories of the services where you want that to be applied. And of course, then you can search. In our case, to keep the thing simple, let's say we want to look into some samples that you can apply onto resource group, right? Resource group. Okay, as you see, it brought us a number of policies here, and some of them add a tag to resource groups. For example, if you look at this policy, you can click on it, and it will give you definition of, what is this tag, and then it can display the name, how it will display, and the parameter. So in this parameter, it asks for two values, tag name and tag value, right? So it requires that your tag in this definition is defined and it has a value. And then you have a policy rule, right? That would tell you, are you enforcing that? Do you want to modify if it doesn't exist, and what you would like to apply? So let me scroll down here. So in our case, this definition has a role definition where this tag is taken, and then if it doesn't exist, it will try to modify that, right? But in terms of defining the policy, you need to keep in mind that you would have a description, the name of the policy, and then after the definition, once you define the parameters, they will show up on another template. And you can also put the good description, like here, for example, if you read this description, which is also defined in the definition file, adds the specified tag and value when any resource group is missing this tag. So if your purpose is to make sure that all the resource group has a certain tag name and tag value, you may go and enforce that. Is it a good idea? Maybe not. So it's going to be up to the organizational policies that you have. And generally speaking, this is all about like if not deploy, if not exist kind of scenarios. It's a good idea to look what's there and maybe audit and make sure that you know what's going on in your environment before blocking something or denying certain actions from being from being done on the resource or resource group that you are trying to target and bring it to the compliance. Okay, that's it. I'm going to go back to the home and click on policies. And now in terms of where you can get the code of this sample that I'm going to show is you can use this GitHub repository, and you will have a link in the post of this video on the Azure Spring Clean 2023. So let's navigate there. So I'm actually in Azure. I opened a Visual Studio Code now, and where we are is this is the Learn Bicep GitHub repository. So if you want to navigate there, it's pretty straightforward. You just need to go and to GitHub, and then here just scroll down and come to the Learn Bicep. And this is basically the samples that I put there. So for tagging policies, you can find those bicep code of those policies and their definitions here in this folder. So I'm going to switch back to Visual Studio now, Visual Studio Code. And here what we have, as you see, I have like 6 policy definitions here. Each of them has the scope defined as a subscription, so it needs to be deployed to subscription scope. And then it has a policy name and description. And as you see from the name, I'm trying to make sure that I can have this audit on resource tags to make sure that they have this matching value on the resource. It has a tag, and same policies I'm applying on the resource themselves, not just resource group, but also the resource. And while looking at the policy rule here, as you see, the effect that it has actually on my case is going to be audit to make sure that I can get a view which resources are compliant and which resources are not compliant. So in order to be able to go and take these policy definitions and wrap them into a construct that you can deploy all together, you would want to go and create an initiative, policy initiative. In our case, I created that under the samples folder. There's this 19-deploy tagging policy to the subscription. So this one, if you scroll up, you would see that it defines the target scope where you want to deploy. Then you define the policy definition ID, and then you give the name. It's it for tag governance, and then it actually refers to an existing deployment of the policy definitions, which means that you have to deploy these policy definitions before actually creating the initiative in Azure portal. And to automate these things in the policy initiative and its references to the tags and all the required parameters, I also created this deployment file under the scripts. Here you have Azure demo. And here, if you never use that, it's straightforward. You would just need to log in using your credentials. And then using the Visual Studio Code, you can go and apply these commands in order to be able to provision those policy definitions and then create the policy initiative. So once this is all created, which takes some time, so you need to be patient, you would get your tag governance policy initiative. So let's look at that. Let's look at the final product once you run them all, what you should be able to see. So I'm going to navigate to Azure portal now. Okay, and here in Azure portal, when you go to the policies, in my case, I see that tag governance and there's a NAS default policy here. So for the tag governance, it's if I click on it, this is the initiative that I just deployed. You would see that it has these rules that we just mentioned here on the left side. There are some compliant and there are some non-compliant, of course. And for compliant resources, you can just click on it. And if there is, for example, in this case, one of the resource groups is compliant. This is the resource group Cloud Marathoner because it has those tags and everything that we just mentioned. But when you go back to the previous page where we actually had a non-compliant. So for example, if we click audit the tag on a resource group, let's see. For example, let's go and look at this one. You would see that there are some non-compliant. Now let me go back. And you can basically see evaluation and what's going on here on this list. So in this case, what I was trying to show is that once you deploy everything, you should be able to see this under the policies. You should be able to see this state of compliance or non-compliance of the resource groups based on the subscription as a scope that I choose. So in my case, you saw what it is. And if you want to go and click on that policy initiative, once this is deployed, you can always go and view the definition or edit the assignment. So let's look at this definition. In this case, you would see it's loading. You would see that these are the basically these are the different policy definitions that are part of this initiative. And if you go to each of them, you can look into definitions and you can look into assignments, what's the scope where it has been deployed, and as well as the parameters that's expecting to be fulfilled when you are deploying this initiative. Okay, that's it. I'm going to switch back now to the slides as we conclude our demo. And this is another view on the, policy definitions and as well as the initiative, and as well as what you see in terms of what in your Azure policy after the deployment succeeded using the scripts that I just show you on that GitHub repo. So if you have any questions, please put them into the chat on the YouTube channel. Next, what we covered basically, we went through the basics of defining what's the Azure Bicep and what you can do as infrastructure as a code with that. Then what are the ways you can declare We looked into what are the ways to declare resources as infrastructure as a code. Next, we looked into how you can organize your cloud resources using different constructs and ways in Microsoft Azure. And after that, we looked briefly into Azure Policies and how you can use them for the resource governance. And when we say resource governance, for example, if data there are different data services that you have, and you have to govern the data, then that also applies to them, right? So your data governance will also require Azure Policies in order to be able to succeed in that mission. And finally, we looked into a small demo to understand what's the Azure policies are, what are the definitions, what are the initiatives, and what it should look like once it's deployed. All right, that's it. In terms of learning resources, I have a couple of sites here. So if you are new to Azure Bicep, you can always go and check this Azure Bicep First Look course on the left top. You can check the Learn Bicep GitHub repo from where these samples are coming. Then, of course, you can check the awesome Azure Bicep for additional Bicep resources to learn, and check the Bicep project as well. And finally, I want to say big thank you again for the Azure Spring Clean event organizers. Big thank you to Joe and Thomas for putting this together and making sure that community can learn during the spring break or spring months. In our case, 1 week of a March, which is awesome presentation from very diverse speakers. And if you want to get in touch with me, you had all the contacts in the beginning of the slide, and as well as you can get them from Linktree. I hope you enjoyed this session, and please let me know if you have any comment or if you have any concerns or anything that didn't work your way, but you want to reach back and discuss it with me. Have a good rest of your day, and thank you for being with me and watching this session. Bye.